Akshay, you're the guy who created the fantastic flowery prose, 345 pages of a letter to the SEC.
325.
325, yeah. Well,
it just felt like 300.
it probably felt like 600. We wanted to capture the energy of Occupy Wall Street because we didn't want to end up being just another progressive think tank that's, sending sort of feeble prose out there to the regulators. We wanted to sort of have that energy that the occupiers have. So when they're holding up signs, they're not taking a mediated approach, they're taking a strong approach. So I wanted to reflect that. One
of the key messages here is the Volcker Rule as it's been proposed is pretty weak. It has massive, great big loopholes, and we should make it much stronger and tighten it up and give it some teeth.
Ideally, the Volcker Rule in its current form would not have included the loopholes that exist even at the statutory stage. But the banking lobby was able to craft a lot of exemptions into the statute itself, Section 619 of the Dodd-Frank Act. So at this stage, at the regulatory stage, we're stuck with that. What we wanted to do is ensure that the agencies don't create additional loopholes and dilute the statute even further.
There seems to be this kind of subtext running through your letter that's saying, oh, well, I really wish that the statute wasn't Volcker Rule, but it was actually glass-steigal, that we were actually just separating all of the market-making and investment banking activities from commercial banks altogether.
Yeah, that would have been ideal. I mean, clearly, and that's certainly a message that a lot of occupiers had. You would see signs saying, bring back glass-steigal. And I think that would have been maybe less practical, but normatively that would have been a nice approach.
What makes you think that glass-steigal was a good thing, given that the huge systemically damaging bank failures of the crisis were Lehman Brothers and AIG and Bear Stearns, all of which were entirely compliant with glass-steigal?
The response that I would have to that is it wasn't just those banks, and I think the reason that we saw TARP and we saw this secret Fed-led program is because all of the other banks who weren't compliant with Glass-Steagall, like Citigroup and many others, were in a huge amount of trouble. And if AIG had been allowed to go under, a lot of those banks would have been in even more trouble. And so I do think that even though you're right, and Lehman and Bear Stearns perhaps were compliant with Glass-Steagall, they weren't the only ones in trouble, and they certainly weren't the reason that TARP came about and the Fed lending program came about. So I do think that the 2008 crisis is much larger. Those were just the spark that sort of made everyone realize that everyone else was in trouble too.
All of the banks received an inordinate amount of taxpayer funding to the tune of $16 trillion. The GDP of the U.S. is $13 trillion. And this is essentially free money that they received at almost 0%. The average person, the average small business owner, even the mid-sized business owner, does not have access to that level of capital. And there's no reason why banks, for no reason other than the fact that they're too big to fail, should have access to that level of capital.